What if the most private documents a person can have were suddenly pushed into the public eye, not by hackers, not by tabloids, but by family? Think about that for a second. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Medical records, diagnoses, dates, details never meant for public consumption. And now imagine those documents becoming the spark that reignites one of the most controversial conversations surrounding Meghan Markle. That is the claim shaking the internet right now. And whether you believe it, doubt it, or feel deeply uncomfortable even hearing it, one thing is undeniable. People cannot stop talking about it. Because this isn't just gossip. This isn't just celebrity drama. This story hits a nerve. Privacy, betrayal, blood ties turned into battle lines. And one explosive allegation that refuses to stay buried. Did Samantha Markle really leak her medical records? And if she did, why? And more importantly, why are people suddenly using those alleged records to make claims about Meghan Markle's ability to conceive? That question alone has lit social media on fire. Comment sections are war zones. Videos are being taken down as fast as they go up. Some creators are backtracking. Others are doubling down. And the audience? Confused, divided, and emotionally invested. But here's where it gets unsettling. This didn't come out of nowhere. Stories like this don't explode overnight unless the ground was already cracked beneath them. And in this case, the ground has been cracked for years. Family tension, public interviews, lawsuits, silence, carefully chosen words, and a long trail of unresolved resentment that many believe has finally reached its breaking point. So before anyone decides what's true or false, let's slow this down. Because the most dangerous stories are the ones people think they already understand. Ask yourself this. Why now? Why would alleged medical documents surface at this exact moment, when public interest in Meghan Markle is already simmering under new pressures, new projects, and new scrutiny? Why would Samantha Markle, a figure long positioned as both insider and outsider, suddenly become the center of such an intimate and volatile claim? And why is the internet so ready to accept an implication without proof? That last question matters more than most people realize. Because this story isn't just about what was allegedly leaked. It's about what people want to believe. And why? From the very first moment whispers began circulating, the reaction was immediate and emotional. Some people expressed shock. Others expressed anger. A few expressed vindication, as if something they had suspected for years had finally been confirmed. But confirmed by whom? That's the part many skipped over. Screenshots began to circulate. Clips were reposted. Headlines were rewritten. Words like leak, proof, and exposed were thrown around freely. And suddenly, a deeply personal subject was being discussed like a courtroom verdict had already been handed down. But no verdict exists. What exists is noise. And in that noise, lines are blurring between allegation and fact, speculation and certainty. This is how modern scandals are born. Not from a single document. Not from a single interview. But from a perfect storm of timing, emotion, and unresolved narrative tension. Samantha Markle has long been portrayed in extreme ways depending on who's telling the story. To some, she's a scorned sibling desperate for attention. To others, she's a silenced voice trying to tell her side against a powerful media machine. That split perception matters, because it shapes how people interpret everything she says or does. When someone already labeled controversial makes a claim, audiences don't approach it neutrally. They approach it with bias, either immediate rejection or immediate belief. And both reactions are dangerous. Now layer in the idea of medical records. These aren't texts. These aren't emails. These aren't opinions. Medical documents carry a weight that feels official, authoritative, and final, even when they're incomplete, even when they're misunderstood, even when they're taken out of context. The mere suggestion that medical records exist is often enough to shut down skepticism. And that's exactly why this story escalated so quickly. But here's the uncomfortable truth most commentators skipped. Even if documents exist, interpretation is everything. Medical information without full context can be misleading at best and devastatingly false at worst. Yet social media doesn't reward caution. It rewards speed. It rewards outrage. It rewards certainty. And suddenly, one alleged leak became the foundation for an even bigger claim. The claim that Meghan Markle can't conceive. Just hearing that should make you pause. Because that isn't just a rumor. That isn't just shade. That is a statement that cuts directly into identity, womanhood, and deeply personal pain that millions of women experience privately every day. And yet it's being debated publicly, casually, almost carelessly. How did we get here? The answer lies in how old rumors resurface when new material appears. People don't analyze from scratch. They connect dots they already drew in their minds years ago. For some, this allegation felt like confirmation. For others, it felt like a grotesque invasion. And for many, it felt like something wasn't adding up. Because if this were truly airtight, why all the contradictions? Why the disappearing videos? Why the softened language? Why the sudden shift from confident statements to vague phrasing? These are the kinds of details that don't scream truth or falsehood on their own, but they do signal instability. And instability is where the real story lives. There's also another layer most people ignored. Silence. Meghan Markle has not directly addressed this allegation. No statement, no denial, no emotional rebuttal. And silence, in the internet age, is rarely interpreted as neutrality. To supporters, it's dignity. To critics, it's guilt. To algorithms, it's fuel. But silence can mean many things. Legal advice, emotional exhaustion, strategic restraint, or simply refusing to dignify a claim with a response. The problem is, people fill silence with their own assumptions, and assumptions spread faster than facts. Meanwhile, the tone of coverage began to change. At first, bold headlines, then careful edits, then disclaimers quietly added. Some outlets walked things back. Others stopped mentioning certain phrases altogether. That doesn't mean the story disappeared. It just went underground. And underground stories often come back louder. This is why we need to rewind before we race ahead. Because the biggest mistake viewers make is starting from the most sensational claim instead of the first domino. Who said what first? How was it framed? What was actually shown? What was inferred? And what was simply assumed? Over the next sections, we're going to unpack this step by step. Not to prove anyone right or wrong, but to understand how a private family conflict morphed into one of the most uncomfortable public conversations imaginable. We'll look at Samantha Markle's history and how it shapes perception. We'll examine how alleged documents became interpreted as universal truth. We'll explore why fertility narratives are uniquely powerful and uniquely dangerous. And we'll ask the question no one seems willing to ask out loud. What if this entire controversy says more about us than it does about them? Because once you strip away the names, the titles, and the celebrity, what's left is a warning. A warning about how easily boundaries collapse, how quickly empathy disappears, and how fast a question can become a verdict when outrage takes the wheel. But before we can understand any of that, we have to start where the fire allegedly began. With the leak itself. Because according to those closest to the situation, the way those documents surfaced is not at all how most people think it happened. And once you see that timeline, everything starts to feel very different. What if the story you've been hearing for weeks, months, even years was about to explode in a way no one expected? That's exactly what some claim happened when Samantha Markle allegedly leaked medical documents that, if true, could reshape the public conversation about Meghan Markle entirely. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly. One post, one hint, a social media user claiming to have seen something shocking. At first, nobody paid attention. After all, in the world of celebrity news, a dozen claims emerge every day. Some are true. Many are exaggerated. Most disappear within hours. But then the narrative began to twist. That single post became a thread. The thread became a video. The video became dozens. Suddenly, headlines were appearing faster than the story could be verified. Samantha Markle leaks medical records, read one. Shocking documents suggest Meghan's fertility struggles, read another. And just like that, the rumor mill had escalated into a full-blown storm. Why did this story gain traction so fast? Part of it is human curiosity. People are drawn to forbidden knowledge, the documents that prove something no one else is supposed to see. Part of it is timing. Meghan Markle has been under public scrutiny for years, her every move analyzed and dissected. And now, allegedly, a family member had provided the ultimate fuel, supposedly personal, supposedly confidential information. But what exactly was leaked? According to claims circulating online, the alleged documents contained sensitive health information. dates, test results, and comments, allegedly enough to suggest that Meghan may face challenges conceiving. Some headlines treated this as fact. Others framed it as a rumor, though with a heavy dose of speculation that made it hard for audiences to separate the two. Think about the emotional weight of that claim. Even without confirmation, the idea that someone's fertility could be questioned publicly is explosive. Fertility is private, intimate, and deeply personal. For a public figure, it's a matter that can't just be ignored. And for millions of viewers worldwide, it becomes a topic of obsession because it's not just about Meghan Markle. It's about identity, womanhood, and the invasive power of celebrity scrutiny. The alleged leaks spread like wildfire. Social media algorithms, hungry for engagement, amplified every post. Threads exploded. Comments flooded in. People argued. People judged. Some celebrated. Some sympathized. And many, understandably, recoiled. The online environment became a microcosm of society's fascination with scandal, power, and family conflict. But the documents themselves, if they exist, aren't the full story. The bigger story lies in interpretation. A test result, a note in a chart, a single line taken out of context. Each of these can be read in multiple ways. And the internet rarely waits for nuance. That's where Samantha Markle's role becomes critical. For years, she's been positioned as a figure of both insider knowledge and outsider grievance. To some, she is a sister marginalized, silenced, and misunderstood. To others, she is opportunistic, seeking attention at every turn. That duality means every statement she makes carries an intense weight and sparks immediate debate. When someone like her allegedly releases documents, the reaction is instantaneous. Not everyone waits for confirmation. Not everyone asks whether the documents are authentic or complete. The perception of authority becomes enough. And in this case, the perception alone created a tidal wave. Once the leak went public, it triggered a cascade of reactions. Influencers dissected the content. YouTubers created reaction videos. Podcasts debated every line. Articles appeared with phrases like shocking revelation and family feud escalates. Even conservative tabloids and mainstream news outlets began to touch the story, carefully hedging their language, but nonetheless amplifying the reach. And here's the critical twist. The timing of the leak appeared calculated to maximize impact. Leaks rarely happen in a vacuum. The internet ecosystem thrives on timing, on context, on the way audiences are primed to react. By surfacing these alleged documents at this particular moment, years into the public saga of Meghan Markle's life, the story instantly felt more potent, more credible, and more urgent. Yet even as speculation swirled, contradictions began to appear. Some claimed the documents were authentic. Others said they were doctored. A few said they were partially real but heavily misrepresented. And through all of this, Meghan Markle remained silent, a silence that only fueled more conjecture. Because silence in the face of explosive allegations is rarely interpreted as neutrality. To supporters, it might be dignity, a refusal to engage in baseless claims. To critics, it's guilt or confirmation of rumor. To algorithms, it's engagement gold. The result? The story continues to grow, whether anyone addresses it or not. Social media users began piecing together timelines, trying to connect dots that were never meant to be connected. Claims about past interviews, statements from friends, prior medical anecdotes, and public appearances all began to be reframed through the lens of this alleged leak. Every move Meghan made, or didn't make, was suddenly scrutinized for hidden meaning. Every public appearance became fodder for speculation. Every video clip, every smile, every comment was mined for evidence. And as the story intensified, it revealed something larger than the documents themselves. It revealed the way modern culture consumes scandal, the eagerness to believe the worst, the readiness to assume, and the willingness to turn private matters into public spectacle. Because the alleged leak did more than just spark controversy. It created a narrative that people could believe, debate, and disseminate. It provided fuel for online discourse, framing Meghan Markle's personal life as a topic of universal scrutiny. And within that, it sparked questions that no one could answer definitively. Questions like, did Samantha Markle act alone? Were the documents authentic? If they were, why now? And perhaps most importantly, What is the impact of publicly questioning someone's fertility? These questions hung in the air as the initial storm raged. Some outlets offered cautious analysis, noting the lack of independent verification. Others amplified claims without context. Social media became a war zone of opinion, speculation, and outrage. And yet, through it all, one fact remained. Once private family conflicts intersect with public platforms, control is lost. Once something enters the digital ecosystem, it spreads faster than any retraction can keep up. Once people believe something, it's almost impossible to unsee. That is the reality of what allegedly happened with Samantha Markle's leak. Whether every claim is true or not, the consequences were immediate. The perception of betrayal, the amplification of sensitive personal information, the rapid spread of speculation, all of it demonstrates how high-stakes family conflict can collide with global attention. But here's the final point about this alleged leak. It isn't the end of the story. In fact, it's only the beginning. Because once these documents, or claims about them, were released, everything else started to shift. Allegations that had been dormant resurfaced. Old disputes were revisited. New narratives took hold. And in the center of it all sat Meghan Markle, silent, scrutinized, and suddenly at the center of yet another storm that the world couldn't stop watching. And the most compelling part? People are already asking questions that go beyond just the documents. Questions that touch on trust, betrayal, power, and the ethical limits of family and public life. Questions that will demand answers, or continue to drive speculation, debate, and obsession. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. She's always been in the headlines, but never on her own terms. That's how one commentator recently described Samantha Markle. And it's an observation that cuts to the heart of why her alleged leak of medical documents is causing such a stir. To understand the fallout, we have to first understand the woman at the center of the storm, her history, her motivations, and the way the public perceives her. Samantha's life has always been intertwined with Meghan Markle's, but their paths have diverged dramatically. One sister rose to global fame, marrying into royalty and becoming a figure under constant scrutiny. The other remained in the background, her voice largely unheard, her personal life far less public. But over the years, that dynamic has shifted, and not always in predictable ways. Some see Samantha as the classic outsider, a sister who never quite fit into the limelight, and now struggles with the frustration of watching Meghan's success. Her interviews, her public statements, and her occasional social media posts paint the picture of someone trying to assert her narrative. To critics, these attempts can seem opportunistic, a calculated effort to insert herself into global headlines. To supporters, they're a fight to be heard, a demand for fairness in a story dominated by a media machine focused almost entirely on Meghan. Her reputation is complicated. On one hand, she has positioned herself as a protective figure, claiming to look out for Meghan's well-being. On the other hand, she has repeatedly made headlines for public criticisms of Meghan, often timed to coincide with major royal events or media cycles. That pattern raises the question. When Samantha speaks, is she motivated by genuine concern, personal grievance, or strategic attention-seeking? The answer is murky, and that murkiness fuels speculation whenever she is involved in a new development. The alleged medical document leak is no exception. By now, Samantha is a figure whose credibility is debated endlessly. Some dismiss her outright. Others believe she has insider knowledge that the public deserves to hear. And that tension, between disbelief and trust, is a key reason why the story exploded so quickly. We also have to consider her past behavior. Samantha has been outspoken in interviews dating back years. She has criticized Meghan's choices, her public persona, and even the decisions of the royal family. Some of these statements were met with sympathy, others with ridicule. But in every case, her voice has been persistent. Persistent enough to command attention now, even if her claims are controversial. Here's the twist. Persistence alone isn't enough to make a leak impactful. Timing is everything. Samantha's alleged leak came at a moment when Meghan's life was already under the microscope. Audiences were already hungry for insight, eager to see cracks in the seemingly perfect public image. And suddenly, Samantha emerged, offering an explosive and extremely intimate perspective. But it's not just the timing that matters. It's the perception of authority. Samantha, by virtue of being Meghan's sister, carries a weight that no casual observer could claim. Whether that weight is justified or not is beside the point. Public perception is enough to make a story viral. People naturally assume that a family member has access to information the rest of the world does not. And in the world of celebrity culture, insider equals credibility, even when that credibility is disputed. The complexity of Samantha's public persona also plays into this narrative. She has sometimes portrayed herself as an emotional victim, at other times as a truth-teller exposing inconvenient facts. She oscillates between vulnerability and defiance, creating a persona that is simultaneously sympathetic and polarizing. This duality keeps audiences engaged. It keeps social media buzzing, and it keeps journalists writing stories, even when hard evidence is lacking. Then there's the question of strategy. Was this leak a calculated move? Was it a spontaneous act born out of frustration? Or was it a mix of both? Observers have speculated endlessly, pointing to patterns in her previous media appearances. She has a history of surfacing just as attention peaks on Meghan, coinciding with interviews, documentaries, or royal announcements. The result is a pattern that suggests strategic timing, though, again, intention is impossible to verify. Another factor is narrative control. Samantha knows that in public disputes, perception often matters more than fact. By positioning herself as the one with knowledge, she shifts the conversation. The focus moves from Meghan's choices to Samantha's claims. The spotlight is redirected, and for a fleeting moment, the sister who has always been in the shadows is center stage. Audience psychology plays a huge role here. People are fascinated by family conflict, especially in high-profile cases. We instinctively want to know what happens behind closed doors. We are drawn to stories that promise access to secrets, no matter how unverified. Samantha's alleged leak taps directly into that curiosity, offering a glimpse into private matters that most would never see. Her credibility, or perceived credibility, is further complicated by the duality of her past claims. Some have been proven inaccurate, others unverifiable. Yet, even failed predictions don't fully undermine her influence. In the court of public opinion, a pattern of attention-grabbing statements can be just as powerful as accurate ones. Audiences remember the drama, the emotion, and the sensation. Facts are secondary. Then there's the media ecosystem itself. Samantha has learned how to navigate it. She knows which outlets will amplify her words, which will challenge them, and which will leave her narrative unchallenged. By understanding this ecosystem, she can ensure that any claim, even a controversial one like an alleged medical leak, gains maximum visibility. And that visibility alone is often enough to make a story feel real, regardless of verification. But let's pause and consider the emotional impact. If Samantha did release these documents, she may believe she is telling the truth as she sees it. She may feel justified, righteous even. But the consequences, real-world consequences, are profound. This isn't just media drama. This is someone's personal life, privacy, and reputation being publicly dissected. That tension between intent and impact is where the story becomes more than gossip. It also raises a question that hangs over every family feud in the public eye. At what point does the pursuit of attention or narrative control cross into harm? When does a sister speaking her truth become a breach of trust? When does a private matter become public property? And how does the audience bear responsibility for consuming it? The public fascination with Samantha Markle is emblematic of a larger pattern. Outsiders who speak loudly about insiders often occupy a dual role. They are vilified and celebrated simultaneously. And that duality makes them powerful players in any narrative. In this case, whether she is outsider, insider, strategist, or simply a frustrated family member, Samantha's actions have amplified a story that was already volatile. By positioning herself at the center of this alleged leak, she forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about family dynamics, celebrity culture, and media consumption. She reminds us that behind every headline, there are people making choices, for better or worse. And she reminds us that, in the digital age, one act, one post, one claim, one document, can ripple outward, affecting millions of viewers, commenters, and speculators worldwide. And as we move forward into the next chapter, We'll begin to examine exactly what these alleged medical documents were, why they were considered explosive, and how the public and media reacted. Because to understand the full impact, we need to separate the woman from the documents, but also recognize how inseparable they've become in public perception. But what comes next is even more shocking. The alleged details themselves, and how people began interpreting them in ways no one could have anticipated. Some things are never meant to be seen. Birth certificates, private letters, therapy notes, and medical records. They are the most intimate reflection of our bodies, our vulnerabilities, and our history. When those walls of privacy are breached, the impact is immediate, visceral, and often devastating. And that is exactly what makes the alleged leak involving Samantha Markle so explosive. Imagine, for a moment, that someone you trusted, someone related by blood, had documents in their possession that outlined the most private parts of your life. And then imagine those documents, or claims about them, being released into the public eye, dissected, analyzed, and debated by millions of strangers. That is the scenario at the heart of this story. Medical records aren't like text messages. They carry authority. They carry weight. And the very suggestion that they exist, regardless of authenticity, imbues any claim with a sense of credibility. Even when incomplete, taken out of context, or misinterpreted, these documents are treated as a form of proof, a tangible representation of truth. That is what makes the alleged leak so dangerous, so controversial, and so compelling to the public. Reports circulating online claim that the documents contain details relating to Meghan Markle's reproductive health, allegations that she may have difficulty conceiving. The mere suggestion of this ignited a storm across social media platforms, news outlets, and discussion forums. Comments ranged from disbelief to outrage, from sympathy to vindictive curiosity. And even without confirmation, the public reaction was intense. Why do medical records provoke such a strong response? Because they are inherently private. They expose vulnerabilities that most people shield from everyone, including family. They are the ultimate window into someone's body and health. And when that window is suddenly opened, it creates an uncomfortable tension, the desire to know versus the understanding that it is none of our business. The leaked documents, or what were claimed to be documents, sparked debates over authenticity. Some commentators insisted they were genuine. Others argued they were doctored or selectively edited. Still others suggested they were entirely fabricated. Yet despite these contradictions, the controversy escalated. People don't need full confirmation to react. They respond to implication, to the possibility of truth, and to the emotional resonance of the claim itself. At the same time, the leak revealed something more profound. The public's appetite for intimate details about celebrities is insatiable. There's a cultural fascination with seeing behind the curtain, especially when it comes to issues like fertility, health, and family dynamics. These are subjects that resonate deeply with everyday experiences. They are private matters for most, yet they become a form of entertainment or moral judgment when attached to a public figure. The alleged documents quickly became a lens through which every past decision, every public appearance, and every personal choice of Meghan Markle was scrutinized. Audiences dissected interviews, speeches, and social media posts for hints or confirmation. Every smile, every hesitation, every comment was suddenly reinterpreted. And even those who had long defended Meghan found themselves questioning the narrative, simply because the authority of medical documentation carries such perceived weight. Yet here lies the paradox. Medical records without context are misleading. A single note or test result can mean multiple things. Interpretation requires expertise, timing, and a complete understanding of medical history, something impossible to achieve from a leaked file or social media screenshot. Yet that did not stop the public or the media from speculating, analyzing, and building a narrative. In the world of celebrity gossip, ambiguity becomes a weapon. The public fills gaps with assumptions. They construct stories based on fragments. And the result is a narrative that feels complete, even when it is based on partial or misunderstood information. In this case, the alleged medical leak became more than documents. It became a story, a symbol, and a tool for debate. We must also consider the ethical dimension. Medical privacy exists for a reason. It protects individuals from exploitation, from judgment, and from harm. The alleged leak crosses this line. It raises uncomfortable questions about the boundaries of journalism, the responsibilities of family members, and the limits of public curiosity. Is it ever acceptable to reveal someone's intimate health information, even if you believe it serves the public interest? And who decides? Adding another layer of complexity is the nature of the claims themselves. Fertility, reproductive health, and the ability to conceive are subjects that touch on identity, culture, and personal dignity. Public discussion of these topics in the context of a private individual or even a celebrity can cause lasting damage. Yet the internet thrives on these conversations, amplifying speculation and encouraging engagement at the expense of privacy. The alleged leak also highlights a psychological phenomenon. People are more likely to believe claims that align with pre-existing narratives. Meghan Markle has long been a polarizing figure. Supporters view her as resilient and sophisticated, while critics have labeled her entitled or opportunistic. The idea of a fertility struggle fits neatly into the mental frameworks of those who wish to question her life choices or public persona. Confirmation bias fuels the spread of these claims, making the alleged leak even more powerful. Then there's the emotional impact. Even for those removed from the story, the concept of personal information being weaponized evokes empathy and discomfort. For millions of viewers, it provokes fear. If someone like Meghan Markle can have her medical history publicly dissected, what about the average person? That emotional resonance is part of why the story gained traction so quickly and why it continues to dominate conversations online. The public reaction was immediate and multifaceted. Some expressed outrage at Samantha Markle for allegedly violating her sister's privacy. Others expressed fascination, almost gleeful, at the supposed insight into a global celebrity's life. News cycles exploded. Social media debates erupted. And within hours, the alleged leak was no longer just a family issue. It was a global topic of discussion. Yet, in the midst of this frenzy, one critical element was missing: verification. The documents had not been authenticated. Independent sources were scarce. And legal experts noted that even if the files were genuine, public interpretation without context could be dangerously misleading. But in the court of public opinion, nuance rarely matters. Emotion, drama, and immediacy always win. That tension between privacy, speculation, and public curiosity is the engine driving this story. The alleged leak is more than documents. It is a reflection of modern society's fascination with celebrity, our appetite for scandal, and the ethical gray zones that emerge when private lives intersect with global attention. And it is precisely that tension that sets the stage for the next chapter. Once the alleged leak was out, the internet didn't just react, it began to interpret. Every line, every date, every implied detail became evidence in a narrative constructed by millions of participants worldwide. But what they didn't anticipate was how that interpretation would spiral. The story would evolve beyond documents, beyond allegations, and into a larger discussion about identity, family, and the way the public consumes private information. And what came next would be even more complicated, raising questions that no one expected, and making the stakes much higher than any leaked document alone could suggest. Truth travels slowly. Speculation travels fast. And in the digital age, the line between the two can vanish in seconds. The alleged leak of Samantha Markle's medical documents didn't just exist in a vacuum. It erupted directly into the wildfire of the internet, where speed and emotion outweigh accuracy and nuance. Within minutes of the first social media posts claiming the leak, hashtags appeared, threads emerged, reaction videos were uploaded, screenshots of supposed documents circulated on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. The moment someone suggested that Meghan Markle could be facing reproductive challenges, the online conversation shifted from casual curiosity to heated debate. And it didn't take long for the narrative to mutate. The internet is a curious creature. It thrives on incomplete information. It thrives on controversy. And it thrives on the perception of authority. Samantha Markle, positioned as a family insider, automatically had credibility in the eyes of many. Combine that with the alleged nature of the documents, and the story became irresistible. Even those who normally demand proof began speculating, connecting dots that may not have been connected at all. Influencers played a huge role in amplifying the story. YouTube reaction channels dissected screenshots and video clips, sometimes stretching what little information existed into elaborate narratives. Podcasts debated the implications of the alleged leak, inviting guests who either defended or criticized Samantha's actions. Every segment, every analysis, every opinion created another ripple, feeding back into the system and accelerating the spread. It didn't stop there. Memes began circulating, some satirical, others critical. The story became part entertainment, part outrage, part cultural phenomenon. Audiences who had never followed royal news closely found themselves swept into conversations about medical ethics, family betrayal, and the invasive power of social media. But here's the crucial point. The speed of the internet doesn't allow for verification. Stories mutate as they spread. A single misinterpreted line can become a headline. A conjecture can become fact if repeated enough times. And the alleged leak, loaded with emotionally charged content, was prime material for this process. Take, for example, the way fertility claims were discussed online. In the early hours, comments were cautious. We don't know if it's true. Within a day, the narrative had shifted dramatically. Tweets and posts framed it as established fact, often citing unnamed sources, alleged document excerpts, or previous interviews as proof. And the audience responded. Not with skepticism, but with engagement, likes, shares, and comments that fueled algorithms and made the story trend. The role of social media platforms in this amplification cannot be overstated. Algorithms prioritize engagement over accuracy, controversy over context, emotion over evidence. And when a topic involves a globally recognizable figure like Meghan Markle, the effect multiplies exponentially. One viral post can reach millions within hours, creating a feedback loop where speculation becomes normalized as public discourse. This is the pattern the internet has perfected over the last decade. Leaks, rumors, and sensational claims now have a predictable life cycle: emergence, amplification, mutation, and eventual mainstream discussion. Samantha Markle's alleged leak followed this pattern almost perfectly. The moment it entered the online ecosystem, the narrative began to evolve independently of any real-world verification. And that's where the danger lies. Because once a story spreads in this way, it no longer belongs to the person at the center. It belongs to the audience, the commentators, and the platforms themselves. Interpretations multiply, misunderstandings solidify, and the original context, if there ever was one, fades into the background. Complicating matters further, people began constructing elaborate timelines and connections, linking past statements, appearances, and interviews to the alleged documents. Every past action of Meghan Markle was suddenly re-examined, reinterpreted, and reframed through the lens of the leak. Videos were paused frame by frame. Speech patterns were analyzed. Facial expressions were scrutinized. Every small detail became evidence in a narrative shaped less by fact and more by expectation. The psychological impact on audiences is significant. Humans are wired to seek patterns. When confronted with ambiguous information, we instinctively fill in gaps. Confirmation bias kicks in. People accept claims that reinforce their pre-existing beliefs and dismiss those that challenge them. In this case, the alleged leak tapped into long-standing narratives about Meghan Markle, her relationship with the royal family, her public persona, and her perceived private life, magnifying the story's emotional resonance. Even skepticism became part of the narrative. People who questioned the authenticity of the documents were often accused of bias or being blind to the truth. Debates became performative. Defenders and critics battled not just over the facts, but over who had the authority to interpret them. And every argument, every post, every comment fed the cycle of engagement, pushing the story deeper into the public consciousness. But the internet also introduced contradictions that only fueled intrigue. Some posts claimed the documents were authentic. Others argued they were altered or fabricated. Some suggested partial truth mixed with exaggeration. The resulting chaos didn't discredit the story, it made it more compelling. Audiences were left wondering, which version, if any, reflects reality? And the answer, or the lack of it, kept the discussion alive, vibrant, and unending. It is worth noting the role of tone in online discussions. Outrage, curiosity, and empathy were all present, but in varying degrees. Outrage amplified engagement. Curiosity kept viewers reading, watching, and sharing. Empathy sometimes emerged, particularly for Meghan, but often took a back seat to drama and speculation. The combination of these emotional drivers made the leak, and its alleged contents, a perfect storm for virality. The online ecosystem thrives on controversy, but it also thrives on personal stakes. When a story involves private information, family conflict, and questions about identity, engagement spikes. This is why the alleged leak became more than a story. It became a conversation, a debate, and a spectacle that engaged millions across multiple platforms. By this point, the leak was no longer just about Samantha Markle or the documents themselves. It had become a lens through which people explored larger themes: privacy in the digital age, the ethics of public scrutiny, and the boundaries of family loyalty. It sparked debates not just about a celebrity, but about society itself. And here's the chilling reality: the internet doesn't wait. It doesn't pause for verification. It doesn't respect nuance. Once speculation is released, it evolves on its own, independent of the truth. And in the case of the alleged leak, that evolution was just beginning. Because what came next wasn't just more discussion, it was interpretation, distortion, and redefinition. Every previous rumor, every past interview, every old claim was suddenly fair game. And the alleged leak became the lens through which everything about Meghan Markle's personal life could, and would, be analyzed. But what came next would push the story into new territory. Once the fertility claims began to circulate widely, the conversation shifted from private family dispute to global speculation about identity, womanhood, and personal choice, territory far more sensitive, far more explosive, and far more controversial than anything the original documents alone could generate. A question whispered in private can become a headline shouted across the world. That's exactly what happened in the wake of Samantha Markle's alleged leak. Among the many claims circulating online, one quickly rose to dominate discussions: the suggestion that Meghan Markle could not conceive. At first, it appeared as a rumor, quietly threaded into discussions on social media. One user suggested it. Another amplified it. And then, almost instantly, it became a headline, repeated and reshared across platforms. Meghan Markle can't conceive? Read some posts. Leaked documents suggest fertility struggles? Read others. What began as speculation rapidly morphed into a form of perceived fact. Why does this particular claim resonate so strongly? Fertility, reproductive health, and the ability to have children are deeply personal matters, tied not only to biology, but to identity, culture, and societal expectations. For most people, these are private struggles. For a global celebrity, they become public spectacle. The alleged leak transformed a question, something private and uncertain, into a topic of global conversation. The mechanics of how this happened are both fascinating and troubling. First, the alleged documents were interpreted, correctly or incorrectly, as evidence of fertility challenges. Then, social media algorithms amplified posts that generated engagement, regardless of accuracy. Outrage, shock, and curiosity fueled sharing. And suddenly, the rumor was no longer contained to niche discussion forums. It reached mainstream news outlets, commentary channels, and millions of viewers worldwide. The transition from question to headline also illustrates the power of implication. The documents themselves may have contained ambiguous or technical information. A single line about a medical test could be interpreted in multiple ways. Yet in the online ecosystem, ambiguity often favors the most sensational interpretation. That is how a question, "Can she conceive?" became an assertion, "She can't." The emotional impact of this cannot be overstated. Questions about fertility touch on identity, womanhood, and personal choice. They evoke empathy, fear, and, in some cases, judgment. And in the public discourse surrounding Meghan Markle, these claims became a weaponized form of gossip. People who already had negative perceptions of Meghan used the alleged claim as confirmation. Those who supported her were forced to navigate a wave of speculation, defending not just a public figure, but the sanctity of personal privacy. Media outlets struggled to balance reporting with ethics. Some used cautious language, alleged, claims, rumors. Others, eager for clicks and engagement, presented the speculation as if it were fact, citing anonymous sources and social media posts. The result was a fragmented media landscape, where some audiences were exposed to measured reporting, while others were bombarded with sensational headlines. Complicating matters further, Samantha Markle's own past statements added fuel to the fire. Her history of public criticism and outspoken interviews made it difficult for the public to assess credibility objectively. Supporters of Meghan questioned her motives, while detractors used her as a seeming insider to validate speculation. This dual perception amplified the drama and created a polarized environment where truth became secondary to narrative alignment. The alleged fertility claim also highlights a broader societal issue: the public's fascination with celebrity reproduction. Questions about having children, miscarriages, or fertility struggles are taboo in most personal contexts, yet they are widely consumed when attached to famous individuals. This paradox creates a perfect storm for gossip, speculation, and emotional engagement. Online conversations quickly escalated beyond mere curiosity. Comment threads debated medical possibilities, ethics, and morality. Memes and satire emerged, blending humor with judgment. Influencers dissected videos, speeches, and social media posts, reading body language and tone for clues. Every action by Meghan was reframed through the lens of the alleged leak, amplifying the claim and embedding it further into public consciousness. Psychology plays a key role in why such claims spread so effectively. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We want to make sense of ambiguous information. Confirmation bias encourages acceptance of claims that align with pre-existing beliefs, and discrediting opposing views becomes a social exercise. In this case, audiences already divided in opinion about Meghan Markle were primed to accept or reject the fertility speculation based on personal alignment, rather than objective analysis. And then there's the social contagion effect. Once enough people believed or engaged with the claim, it became self-reinforcing. Those who were skeptical were pressured to respond. Discussions escalated into debates. Emotional engagement spiked. And the story gained a momentum that made retraction or correction increasingly difficult. Even the role of silence cannot be overlooked. Meghan Markle did not publicly respond to these claims. That silence was interpreted in multiple ways: as denial, as confirmation, as dignity, as weakness. The absence of response allowed speculation to flourish unchecked, giving audiences permission to fill the gaps themselves. The way a question became a headline also reflects the dynamics of modern media. Speed, sensationalism, and algorithmic amplification favor clarity over complexity. Ambiguity is often distilled into the simplest, most engaging narrative. In this case, can she conceive? Transformed into she can't conceive, because that version is easier to share, easier to debate, and far more clickable. The consequences of this shift are profound. Not only does it impact public perception of Meghan Markle, but it also raises ethical questions about privacy, journalism, and the limits of public discourse. The alleged leak has become a lens through which broader societal dynamics, celebrity culture, gender expectations, and the morality of speculation are examined, debated, and weaponized. But perhaps the most striking aspect is how quickly the narrative evolved from a private family matter to a global topic. The alleged leak, a single act by a sister, set off a chain reaction that touched millions, provoked intense debate, and sparked ethical and emotional dilemmas that extend far beyond the initial documents. And yet, even as the story spread, contradictions began to emerge. Some claimed authenticity. Others questioned it. Some interpreted the documents one way, others a completely different way. The ambiguity, rather than weakening the story, strengthened its viral potential. Audiences were left in a state of constant speculation, unable to confirm or dismiss, perpetually engaged. And just when it seemed the public narrative had stabilized, new interpretations began to surface, subtle, nuanced readings of the documents that introduced fresh controversy. The question that had started as private speculation now dominated global discussion. Was this leak evidence? Or was it merely a catalyst for judgment, speculation, and debate? What came next would push the story even further. exposing how old rumors resurface when new claims appear and how the public is ready to consume, interpret, and amplify them without pause. Once the alleged leak of Samantha Markle's documents hit the public sphere, the consequences rippled far beyond social media. Family dynamics, friendships, and professional relationships were suddenly caught in the crossfire, and the media, ever hungry for engagement, amplified every tension, every emotion, and every contradiction. Family members, particularly those close to Meghan, found themselves in impossible positions. Loyal supporters were forced to respond to claims they may not have verified. Extended relatives, who previously stayed out of the spotlight, were suddenly asked to comment or clarify. And Samantha herself became both the catalyst and the lightning rod, drawing praise from some quarters while condemnation poured from others. Every public statement became scrutinized, every nuance dissected, and every silence interpreted as a statement in itself. The alleged leak also reignited long-standing familial conflicts. Meghan and Samantha have a history of public disagreements, dating back years, from interviews to social media disputes. This history made the claims about medical documents even more combustible. People didn't just see a single incident. They saw years of tension, drama, and estrangement distilled into one explosive moment. And the audience, conditioned to seek narrative patterns, framed the alleged leak as the latest chapter in a decades-long story of sibling conflict. Friends of Meghan were not immune either. Loyal confidants were drawn into media cycles, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes under pressure. Comments made in private interviews, casual remarks, or friendly anecdotes were often reframed to fit the emerging narrative about fertility, family tension, and public betrayal. Even those who wished to remain neutral found themselves interpreted as taking sides. Meanwhile, the media frenzy was relentless. News outlets, both traditional and digital, rushed to report, analyze, and speculate. Headlines ranged from cautious, alleged leak surfaces amid family tensions, to sensational, Meghan Markle can't conceive, documents released by sister. Every story drove traffic, clicks, and engagement, which fueled algorithms and reinforced the public perception that the leak was both urgent and significant. Social media, of course, was a battleground. Audiences created their own narratives, memes, and theories. Platforms like Twitter and Instagram became echo chambers of outrage, sympathy, speculation, and debate. Comment sections overflowed with analysis. Some logical, some conspiratorial, some cruel. People were not just reading the story. They were participating in it, shaping it, and amplifying it in ways that even the original leaker could not control. But the ripple effect extended further. Brands, advertisers, and public figures who had ties, direct or indirect, to Meghan Markle were suddenly under scrutiny. Partnerships were evaluated, media appearances reconsidered, and messaging strategies adjusted. Even tangential associations could spark discussion, as the alleged leak became a lens through which every connection was examined. One of the most striking aspects of this ripple effect was how quickly private and professional spheres collided. A family disagreement, previously confined to personal spaces, became public spectacle. Friends' loyalty and discretion were tested. And the media ecosystem amplified every reaction, creating a loop where private life and public perception were inseparable. This ripple effect also exposed the complexity of modern celebrity culture. No matter how carefully one manages their public image, private moments, real or alleged, can suddenly become the dominant narrative. The alleged leak demonstrated how a single act, rooted in family dynamics, could trigger a global conversation touching on identity, reputation, and societal judgment. At the same time, ethical questions emerged. How much responsibility do journalists, content creators, and the public bear when amplifying unverified claims? Does the fact that the documents allegedly came from a family member justify their dissemination? And at what point does public curiosity cross into harm, invasion, or exploitation? These questions remained largely unanswered, yet they shaped the discourse in subtle, pervasive ways. The emotional toll on all involved was profound. For Meghan Markle, the alleged leak and subsequent coverage meant navigating intense scrutiny while maintaining privacy, dignity, and personal boundaries. For Samantha Markle, It meant balancing perceived truth-telling with public backlash. For friends, family, and associates, it meant being pulled into a vortex of public debate and speculation. And for audiences, it created a moral and emotional puzzle. Curiosity versus empathy, judgment versus understanding, engagement versus restraint. Even more compelling, the ripple effect highlighted how quickly a narrative can spiral beyond the intentions of the initial actor. Whether Samantha Markle intended to provoke discussion, vindicate herself, or assert control over the story, the consequences extended far beyond what any single person could anticipate. The leak became a catalyst, a prism through which multiple perspectives, assumptions, and emotions converged. The media, ever responsive to audience engagement, further fueled the story by framing the leak as part of a broader saga. Articles referenced previous controversies, interviews, and family disputes, presenting a continuity that reinforced the perception of truth. Every new claim, every commentary piece, every opinion poll fed back into the cycle, amplifying the ripple effect in ways that made it self-perpetuating. And as the story evolved, the stakes grew higher. Discussions about privacy, family loyalty, and public scrutiny became entangled with larger societal conversations about gender, reproductive health, and celebrity ethics. The alleged leak was no longer just a family matter. It became a cultural touchpoint, a story about boundaries, empathy, and the public's hunger for scandal. But just when it seemed that the ripple effect had reached its peak, a new development threatened to push it even further. Interpretations of the documents, along with commentary from legal experts, social media influencers, and unnamed sources, began to introduce fresh layers of complexity. Claims were questioned, motives were scrutinized, and suddenly, the narrative was expanding in directions no one had predicted. What came next would show just how intertwined family, media, and the internet have become, and how a single alleged leak can reshape conversations, perceptions, and reputations in ways that are impossible to contain. When private information enters the public domain, questions of legality and ethics quickly arise. The alleged leak of Samantha Markle's documents didn't just ignite gossip and speculation. It raised profound questions about privacy, consent, and the responsibilities of those who hold sensitive information. Suddenly, what began as a family dispute evolved into a legal and ethical quagmire with global attention. Medical records are protected for a reason. They contain intimate details that can affect reputation, relationships, and emotional well-being. In most jurisdictions, unauthorized disclosure can result in legal consequences, including potential lawsuits or regulatory action. But in the realm of celebrity, the lines are often blurred. When family members are involved, when allegations circulate online, and when millions of people are engaging with the story, the legal and ethical landscape becomes a maze. Some legal experts weighed in almost immediately. They noted that if the documents were genuine, sharing them publicly could constitute a serious breach of privacy laws. Even if the release was framed as a public interest matter, questions would arise. Was there consent? Was the disclosure necessary? And who bears responsibility when millions consume, share, and interpret the information without verification? Ethically, the situation was just as complex. Many commentators argued that family members have a moral duty to protect one another's privacy, regardless of public attention. Others countered that withholding information could be construed as hiding truth, especially when a global figure's life intersects with societal interests, media scrutiny, and public perception. The tension between privacy and public interest has no simple answer, and this alleged leak exemplifies the challenge. The media's role intensified the dilemma. Some outlets approached the story cautiously, using terms like alleged or reportedly. Others prioritized clicks and engagement, framing speculation as news. Headlines often blurred fact and inference, leaving audiences with the impression that the claims were confirmed, regardless of evidence. In this environment, ethical journalism collided with viral content, creating a fog of uncertainty. At the same time, legal teams associated with Meghan Markle were reportedly assessing options. Legal counsel likely considered whether to pursue injunctions, defamation claims, or other protective measures. But even when legal action is possible, timing and public perception complicate matters. The act of pursuing a lawsuit can itself become fodder for media coverage, further entangling privacy and public debate. Social media, of course, magnified the ethical challenges. Platforms are designed for speed, engagement, and amplification, not careful deliberation. Once allegations about fertility and medical records were introduced, audiences rushed to judge, debate, and share. The rapid spread of information, true or false, makes enforcing privacy nearly impossible. By the time legal experts weigh in, millions have already formed opinions, shared screenshots, and constructed narratives. The alleged leak also sparked discussion about the ethics of family intervention in public matters. Some defended Samantha Markle, suggesting that if she believed something important, she had a right, or even a duty, to speak out. Others condemned the move as a betrayal, pointing out the profound personal consequences of sharing sensitive information. The debate underscores a difficult reality. What may seem justified to one party can feel devastating to another. At the heart of these legal and ethical battles lies perception. The public rarely sees the nuances of privacy law, consent, or ethical reasoning. What they see are headlines, tweets, and posts amplified for attention. They interpret documents, statements, and social media interactions through their own biases. And in that environment, reality becomes secondary to interpretation. Interestingly, some legal analysts noted that even leaked or allegedly unauthorized documents can have a powerful effect without ever being formally verified. The perception of authority, the idea that a family member is revealing truth, can carry weight, independent of accuracy. This perception influences public opinion, media framing, and online discourse, often more than the documents themselves. The alleged leak also raised concerns about precedent. In an era where family disputes can be instantly shared online, questions arise about boundaries, trust, and the enforceability of privacy protections. How far can public interest be invoked to justify disclosure? When is familial transparency ethical, and when is it an invasion? These questions remain hotly contested, both in public debate and in legal analysis. For Meghan Markle, the stakes were enormous. The leak not only touched on her personal health and family relationships, but also on her public image, philanthropic work, and professional projects.